Okay, I want to give another testimony on why the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, through the leadership and guidance of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, has helped me dramatically change and transform my life and the way that I see things, the way that I operate on a daily basis, the way that I operate in my business, the way that I operate in my family, the way that I carry myself. And so, just first to address a couple of points that I know people are going to try to make. And people are going to want to say, oh, well, Nation of Islam, don't they believe that the white man is the devil? And yes, that is true. And if that is the case, which I believe that it is, if you look at all the evidence from what the European has done since he has conquered and left Europe and done what he's done anyways, you can look at the evidence. There's pretty good argument for that. And if that is the case, I started looking at myself and thought to myself, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, that is true. I fall into that category. I've been pretty devilish throughout my life. I've caused my parents a lot of hell. I've been an addict. I've been kind of a dirtbag. I've been in and out of jail. I've been through divorce. I've been in fights. I've been stabbed. I've been, running around with gangs and doing all this stuff. Okay. So if that is the case, the white man is the devil, then I've got some work to do. And so this truth allowed me to start looking at myself in a different sense, from a different perspective. Not that I'm some red horned creature from some sort of like weird spooky character that we sometimes think of when we think of the devil. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about attributes. We're talking about a spirit and attitude of that I had, and that if we look at the leaders of this world, the politicians and the governments that are controlling things, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the DuPonts, all these people that I've studied in business, yeah, okay, yeah, they the devil's a murderer, a deceiver, a liar. Okay, so these are just characteristics that we're talking about here. It's nothing spooky, nothing too crazy. So able to start to comprehend a little bit about myself. A lot of times we look at the seven deadly sins. So seven deadly sins, you've got pride, greed, fear, wrath, sloth, whatever, envy, right? Lust, and all of these different things. Okay, these are the devils that are inside of me that I have to deal with. And the teachings of the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, specifically through the leadership and the teaching of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, started giving me real practical ways to look at myself and my history. And one of the first things, this is one of the things that I love so much about the Nation of Islam, is I've always considered myself like a scientific and practical type of logical type of thinker. I've had a little bit of education in that area, and logic and critical thinking, and how to structure arguments, how to do research, so on and so forth. Not an expert in that area, but enough. I've studied it enough to be able to think critically about things, right? And so one of the things that I loved about the Nation of Islam is that they never told me that their religion was the only way. And one of the first things that some of the first guidance that I was given was to look into Scientology, into Dianetics. And in Dianetics specifically is the modern science of mental health and the science of the mind. It's like a manual for your mind, right? It explains in a scientific way of how the mind works, what trauma does to the mind, what pain does to the mind, and what types of manifestations these things can have. And so I realized that what they're teaching is ultimately a universal teaching. I never really knew the benefits of Buddhism or the importance of Zoroastrianism, and I haven't looked into those religions like deeply, but I have surface level dwelled on those and looked into them here and there. And I never understood the unification of the human family once I started looking through the lens of the Nation of Islam. I was able to see all of the different religions as important pieces of the puzzle, as not I'm right and you're wrong, or you're going to hell if you don't believe this way. I was able to, it's all scientific and logical. You do your own research and you draw your own conclusions. Nobody's drilling into you what you got to be and who you got to be, or how you got to think. And I learned that through Scientology, and knowing Scientology is knowing how to know, right? And so the study tech in Scientology gives you a new way to study. And I did this all after college. So I had a little bit of kind of an interesting process of where I had this kind of foundation in our traditional educational system. And then I started looking in these areas and doing research in areas that they told me not to look. And so I learned how to study in a different way and in a more effective way in Scientology by defining words and clearing words as I'm studying something to make sure that I don't go past a word that I don't understand without defining it first. And anytime that I get bored, that I lose interest in a study, it's likely because I went past a word or a concept that I didn't understand. And that is a tech that is in the very beginning of every single Scientology book that you'll read. And it's one of the most valuable study texts that I've came across. And so you can tell how effective something is by the fruit that it bears. So if I'm starting to expand my mind, if what I'm learning is helping and expanding my ability to understand any concept that I want to know about, or any teaching that I want to know about, anything that I want to study, I'm able to study better because I knew this is a foundational knowledge, then that's enough evidence for me to say that it's true, that it's effective. So if the premise is, if something increases your ability to understand any other topics or knowledge that you desire to understand, then isn't it foundational? Isn't it an essential knowledge? And furthermore, I knew nothing about Jesus until I started studying in the Nation of Islam. I learned about things like Easter. One of the first lectures that like blew my mind by Minister Farrakhan is called That Man Jesus, or This Man Jesus, I think. And it was on Easter Sunday, and he goes into things that I just missed, I guess. You know, you just kind of go on blindly and you practice these things and you participate in these things and you have no idea what they actually mean. But he broke down the meaning of Easter. And he broke down the math behind, if Jesus was to die on a Friday night, which that's, Friday evening, is if he, was drugged through the streets all day and so on and so forth, and then he died Friday night, and you just do the simple math, Friday night to Saturday night is one day, Saturday night to Sunday night is one day, and so Sunday night to Monday, 3 days. Where's the 3 days come from? And just little things like that. I was like, man, how did I miss that? If Jesus was resurrected on the third day, it would have been Monday. So the math doesn't even line up, and then all the pagan traditions that are between the the rabbit being the fastest reproducing animal on the planet, to the egg representing fertility, and Easter being the name of a sex goddess named like Astarte or something like that, right? And then he broke down Christmas, and all the things behind there. It's like, oh, okay, we haven't really been celebrating Jesus. We've been celebrating paganism. It's not hard to see that when you take a look at it, because very few people, you very rarely hear anything about Jesus on Christmas or Easter, at least where I come from. It was all about hunting Easter eggs or Santa Claus or whatever the case is, and very, very little talk about Jesus. So it was pretty easy for me to logically conclude that this new knowledge that I was coming across is more in line with the teachings of Jesus. So therefore, I became a better Christian as I started studying this. And it's like people when I say like, "Oh, are you a Muslim?" No, this is the end of religion. I'm not a religious person. This teaching, this study, has given me the ability to no longer label myself anything, because the labels, when you live in the universe and you start to understand your connection and your relationship to everything, then the labels aren't sufficient. I'm Muslim, I'm Christian, I'm Jew. That's not sufficient. And Jesus said himself that when he comes, there will be no difference between the Jew and the Gentile. And he's talking about a unification of the human family under one God. That's a universal truth. I love that concept. I used to do a lot of psychedelics and different things growing up. And I always liked the idea of like free spirit and the ability to be a free thinker and to kind of be rebellious and to kind of, not follow the traditions or the social norms. And I see the benefit in that now too, although I was kind of going down that wrong path. The way that I was expressing that, or the traps I fell into during that process, weren't ideal for a human being. Obviously drugs are bad for you, and you have severe health consequences that come along with that. But the ideas behind it, I was kind of always thought that way. I didn't want anybody making decisions for me or telling me how to think. And so I love the idea of a universal teaching. I love the idea of being able to study something and it improving my ability to understand concepts in another realm of study, right? Or another area of study. If I can study what Minister Farrakhan is teaching me through the Nation of Islam and then take that and apply that to Buddhism, which you can, and become a good Buddhist, which you can, but then you realize like, oh, it's not about Buddhism or Scientology, or I'm connected to the human family. I'm unified with the human family. And the only ones that I'm not unified with are the ones that are liars, murderers, deceivers. Those are the only ones I don't want anything to do with. So it becomes more about your actions, who you are as a person, just kind of like that, golden rule. Do unto others as you'd have done unto you. That's really what I didn't understand that stuff until I came into these teachings. And so it is a transformative teaching, and it allows you to lower the veil from your eyes of that the mass media puts up over us, and to see, all this narrow thinking of, hey, you're supposed to think this way, you're supposed to think this way. Santa Claus came down the chimney, the Easter bunny is definitely laying these eggs out there. You got to find them. And also the tooth fairy is going to be here, and you're an idiot if you don't follow this. You're a bad person if you question this or think otherwise. I'm not really having any of that. I'm just not having that. I'm not really following. I'm not really feeling that anymore. So yeah, but that's just kind of my experience with it all. And if the white man is the devil, which I believe he is, and I'm white, doesn't mean I hate myself. And ultimately, it just means that I got some work to do. I've got some things to look at. I've got some things to improve. And when you kind of remove yourself from it all and take a look at humanity as a whole, at the world as a whole, you realize, hey, everybody's struggling from the same thing, man. Race and all this stuff doesn't really matter. There's some important truths to look at in history and things like that. But ultimately, when it comes to the idea of improving myself, the idea of renewing and expanding my knowledge and getting closer to God and being a better father and being a better husband and being a better friend and leader and business owner and so on and so forth, man, there's some fundamental principles here that I just got to look at. I got to examine myself and improve myself and not be those things anymore. And then I don't fall under that category anymore. It's not, I don't know. I think people think it's like a hopeless situation or something. You got people like Trump and these guys who refuse to do the right thing, and they just want to take as many people down with them as they possibly can. And it's just like a little kid throwing a fit and stomping around and dropping bombs on people and stuff like that. And that's crazy. That's wild. And just a very immature way of thinking, way of acting, and just constantly throwing stones at people, and it's wild to watch that. So those are the people that I really would say would be the devil, would be Satan, because they just refuse to submit. They refuse to try to be a better person, and I don't want my kids growing up in that world. I don't want to I don't want my family to have to live in that world. It is the world that we live in, but I can create my own little atmosphere. I can create my own world that we live in that is separate from all of that stuff. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to do, and that's what these teachings has allowed me to start to do. There's nothing weird about the teachings of the Nation of Islam. There's nothing weird or evil about being a Muslim and being white in America. And this is new. This is a new thing. This is a new teaching, a new Islam. This is not Arabic culture. This isn't Middle Eastern, because there's a lot of problems there too, and so on and so forth. It's something new, and that's what we need, and that's what I like about it. Something new and different. And I don't really care what people think or what people say or ultimately any of that. I care about what God thinks and how He judges me, what I do every day, and I got a lot of work to do, man. And that's just what I'm trying to do. And yeah, so that's that on that topic.